Ho ho, holy crap, this book sucked.
The world is weird and makes me mad, but at least I get to talk about it with Jose.
In 2015, Glenn Beck was in one of the darker phases of his career. Exiled from Fox News and feeding money to his struggling media company, Blaze Media, Glenn's star seemed to be fading. Like many desperate men before him, he turned to Jesus for an assist, and he was going to bring all of us along with him. The battle between Jesus and Santa for supremacy during the Christmas season has raged for as long as children have realized presents are way more fun than going to church. But rather than give in to the red-suited hero, Glenn decided to merge these two stories together. Over the course of, according to Beck, 4 years, he workshopped a story each evening as he told it to his children, eventually cobbling together a book he would title The Immortal Nicholas. In 2015, this book was published, and it was released with all the fanfare of a man who had gotten rich working at Fox News, who was committed to losing as much of that money as possible. He produced a trailer for this book that was equal parts confusing and expensive. Now your first guess is right. The old man in this trailer is indeed the man who would become Santa Claus. But who is the little boy he's frightening with weird toy? Or the other kid dangling from the rope? And why is Santa beating the crap out of these guys? To answer these questions, we have to delve into the mystery of the Immortal Nicholas.
Thank you so much. And Merry Christmas.
Oh god, here we go. This novel is ostensibly about fathers and sons, specifically the many sons of our main character, Agios. When the story opens, Agios is 33 years old, living in the mountains with his 10-year-old son, Philos. Agios' wife had died the previous year in childbirth. In case you can't speak Greek, Agios translates to saint, and Philos means beloved. This will not be a subtle book. The first father-son relationship we see is here. The book opens with the two of them ascending a mountain to gather some valuable frankincense resin. The trees are precariously placed alongside a mountain, and Agios had planned to harvest them so his son would be provided for. Even though these trees are growing out the side of a mountain, Agios took the additional security step of putting families of adders in there to frighten away would-be thieves. Since the only way to reach these trees is to be lowered down by a rope, I'm not sure the adders were necessary. Even worse, they also prove deadly as Agios isn't able to clear them all out. One of them bites Philos, and the boy falls to his death. And this solves the mystery of the boy dangling from the rope. So Agios kinda dropped the ball on that one. I want to play an excerpt of Glenn Beck reading from this book, specifically the passage describing Philos' death. And I'm going to put the text next to it because there's something interesting going on here.
Agios screamed as he watched his son fall, his dark eyes locked on the child that was everything good, that held all the hope that he had left in the world. And he could do nothing. Philos fell straight down to the lowest tree, smashed into it with the impact surely ended his agony and fear. His body hung caught there, broken and lifeless. After his first wail of pain, he had not cried out again. He died like a man. Falling to your death because your father put some snakes in a tree you were collecting resin from does not sound as though you died like a man to me. But more importantly, Glenn seems to be rewriting this book as he reads it out loud. Glenn Beck released a video shortly before this book came out saying that he felt like this wasn't the completed version of the story and he wished he had a few extra months to work on it but had to release it in time for the holiday season in 2015. I wonder if the narrated version is closer to what he wanted, or maybe there's just a version out there he would hammer out if he had a few extra months to work on it. I'm not sure it matters because I don't suspect any version of the Immortal Nicholas will be passed down to future generations, so I'm probably worrying over nothing here. With his son dead, Agios becomes a wandering drunk.
eventually joining a caravan intrigued by the frankincense he carries with him. The caravan belongs to a man named Casper who, as luck would have it, happens to be one of the 3 wise men en route to witness the birth of the baby Jesus. Throughout these early sections of the book, we learn very little about Agios. He's a man of few words, living as a hunter in the mountains. Even after a multi-day bender, he can still fight off armed men in a caravan, shows that he apparently is also some kind of amazing fighter. As the book goes on, we'll learn he has other skills as well. He's a carpenter, he can make small carvings, construct mechanical devices, he can speak a few languages, knows all sorts of history, and he's even a good actor, apparently. The only special skill he doesn't seem to possess is being an interesting character. But in his defense, this story never really gives him the chance to be all that interesting. I figured at some point he'd have some secret history revealed to us, but no, he's just generally awesome. Even listening to Glenn Beck speak about this character, he talks about how he wanted to make a better life for his son, presumably so he wouldn't have to face the same struggles, but we're never told what his life was like before his son was born. We barely know what his life was like when his son was alive. There's so much presumed here. He's this fully formed character who we never really get a chance to understand, even though this book is well over 300 pages. It just seems like a lot of it exists in Glenn Beck's head, and he never really explains any of it. We're just supposed to assume that, sure, he's some badass who really cares about his son. I guess, sure. As the caravan travels, Agios meets a slave who would become a son-like figure to him in the future. Unusually tall and suffering from some kind of cognitive difficulty, the slave can only speak his own name, Krampus. Yeah, that's right, I said Krampus. In European folklore, Krampus was in many ways the anti-Santa Claus who would punish children who misbehave instead of rewarding them with gifts. Often depicted as some kind of goat demon, the traditional version of Krampus is very much at odds with the one we see in this book. While Agios' relationship with Philos is largely implied, we see Krampus' affection for Agios draw the two together. From this point on, the two travel side by side, much in the way the Santa and Krampus from European folklore do. But in this novel, Krampus acts less like a malevolent counterbalance and more like a child dependent on a patient father. Particularly when he's hit with a bout of physical pain that, to me at least, read like an asthma attack, though the book never really says what it is he's suffering from. Aside from taking a shine to slaves, Agios also has some fondness for children in general. He enjoys carving small animals out of wood and gives them to children, something he did for his son before he died. He also likes to give them in secret because seeing happy children also reminds him of his son. I want to read out a sample of the writing in this book. Here's a conversation between Agios and his short-term buddy on the road, Gamos. In this scene, Agios is thinking of his unnamed homeland and his dead son. "What is it?" Gamos asked as Agios stared into the distance. "Nothing. Why do these mountains fill you with sorrow?" Agios didn't look at him. "Not the mountains. Memories." "Ah," Gamos said. "You have lost someone. A brother? Parents? A woman?" "It doesn't matter," Agios said gruffly. "I've lost good friends," Gamos said. "In battle. It hurts. Talking might help." Agios remained silent for many strides. Gamos eventually said, "Some religions teach that after we die, our spirits live on in a kingdom underground. I have hopes of seeing my friends again." "I don't know about any of that," Agios said heavily. "Maybe they do go on. Sometimes I see them in my dreams." He would say no more. And that's how Agios carries himself throughout the book, rough statements that vaguely allude to his hopelessness, and the plot moves on, written in the same stilted prose, heavy, weighty, and clunky. The only time we see any humanity shine through is the warmth he displays towards children. It seems as though Glenn Beck decided that this would be the one relatable trait Agios would have throughout the story. His sadness, anger, and few scraps of joy are only visible when through the medium of how he relates to children, either in person or through his memory, particularly when it comes to his sons. Agios and Krampus arrive with the 3 wise men to the manger housing the newly born baby Jesus, and it's here the book's story about Agios comes to a crashing halt, and the plot instead passively retraces the story of Jesus, first, obviously, with his birth, and then moving decades into the future, all the way up to his crucifixion. The problem with so much of this section, which lasts for about half this book, is that Agios will no longer seem relevant. Upon Jesus' birth, the wise men task Agios with being his silent protector, a personal Batman, if you will. And his only contributions over the course of over 30 years is to find a mule for Joseph and Mary to get them out of Jerusalem, and then kill one Roman guard who tried to chase after them, and scare another one away. The rest of the time, he's pretty much chilling out, hanging out with Krampus and watching various Bible stories unfold. Here's one example of Agios watching the Holy Family from afar. They were coming slowly down the wide steps, an old man at Joseph's elbow, taking only one slow step down at a time. Agios saw that he trembled as he walked, but then he realized that the old man was also weeping, blinded with tears. Agios did not so much as look twice at Joseph and Mary, but he fell in not far behind them. The old man, Agios heard Joseph call him Simeon, was saying, "Now the Lord may let me go in peace. He promised me that I would not die until I have seen and held in my arms this child, who will bring salvation to Israel and to the Gentile world alike." He murmured prayers of thanks and blessing and said his farewell as Joseph and Mary left the temple gates. We never hear from Simeon again, and these two paragraphs are never mentioned in any other context, not as a plot point or as part of the development of any character. Simeon is a figure who appears in the Gospel of Luke, and it doesn't get a very lengthy mention there, but he only seems to appear in this book because it's trying its hardest to recreate everything from those Gospel stories. The Gospel stories are the 4 books of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that recount the life of Jesus Christ, so it's only natural that they would be used to inform some parts of this story. But when what's being used has no bearing on this novel's story, what's the point of including it at all? It does buy some degree of authenticity to match the gospel stories as close as possible, but it seemed odd to put your Santa Claus origin story in the back seat for 150 pages while you just retell the reader stories from the Gospels. Agios is still mentioned and is around, and we get little bits and pieces where he and Krampus grow closer together, but most of his scenes are spent watching the family from afar. For example, there's one section in particular where Joseph and Mary are headed to Egypt, and Krampus's illness forces him and Agios to stop, leaving their charges out of sight. What seemed like a tense moment where the family is exposed to danger without their silent guardian there to protect them is immediately diffused, because when Agios and Krampus finally catch up to them, they found out that Joseph and Mary are being helped by some other people who were also hired by the 3 wise men to look out after them. Who these people are and what relation they have to the plot is pretty much unknown, and any drama or tension that might have existed is gone in the blink of an eye. This is what Agios' mission basically boils down to. He stands guard, waiting for some kind of attack that never comes. This goes on for 30 years. Mercifully, the book doesn't dwell on 30 years of inaction, and it skips forward to a moment where Agios actually experiences a bit of growth. Agios and Krampus wander into the aftermath of a gospel story, and Agios drinks some water which Jesus had blessed sometime in the past. In that moment, Agios is transformed by the living water from a jaded cynic, stoically doing his duty, to being fully devoted to the cause and life of Jesus Christ. Just in time, too, because Jesus is being tried and will soon be crucified. Agios tries to save Jesus when he's being crucified, but he's in his 60s at this point, and obviously if you're aware of how the Gospels end, Jesus does not survive the crucifixion. Agios is devastated. We get a callback here to when Philos died on the frankincense tree, as the book tries to draw a parallel to Jesus on the cross. It doesn't quite work though, because Philos didn't die on the tree. He died from the fall when the rope supporting him broke. The novel makes this weird allusion to the fact that since Krampus has been relatively close to Jesus throughout most of his life, his illness's effects were somehow lightened because of that. It's almost as if Jesus has some kind of passive healing field around him, like he's Lucio from Overwatch. When Jesus dies, the field drops and Krampus can't fight off the illness and dies as well. Much like the argument I was slowly laying out about fathers and sons via the life of Agios, the arrival of Jesus creates a big mess in the whole through line. It reveals that this novel is actually 2 stories being told in parallel, and never really brings them together in any meaningful way. Worse than that, the Jesus part of the story is so prominent. It completely disrupts the Agios narrative, turning him into a spectator. Devastated at the loss of Jesus and Krampus, Agios decides that he can no longer go on, and tries to kill himself. It doesn't work though, because we find out Agios is now immortal. This brings us to part 2 of the novel, which only takes up about a third of the total length. The story has jumped forward nearly 3 centuries, and now Agios lives alone in the mountains, riding a sledge pulled by 8 dogs. This is as close as we're getting to reindeer in the book, by the way. Agios comes across a young shepherd named Nicholas. This boy is the first bit of human contact Agios has had in centuries, and the third boy who will soon act as a son figure to the man. He's also the boy in the trailer being frightened with the weird toy. This is how Agios endears himself to the kid. Yeah. Nicholas isn't too remarkable a character, acting very much like a 10-year-old would. Curious and kind, this awakens the paternal spirit in Agios. In spite of spending over 200 years in isolation, often trying and failing to kill himself, Agios is suddenly the same man he was in part 1 of the story. The book tells us he's unsure of how to live around people again, but his attitude towards Nicholas is the usual stoic version of himself we remember from earlier chapters, so I'm not really convinced by that narration. It seems more like Agios hasn't changed at all. He's just the same character throughout the whole story until he's been given divine inspiration. Agios' changes, the few times they come, never feel earned, and his more fervent religious spirit always seems stilted and unnatural. We get another one of those sparks when Nicholas reveals he's been studying to become a Christian priest, and Agios finally finds out what happened after Jesus died. Here's Nicholas's explanation to Agios. He's not dead at all. On the 3rd day, he rose, Agios. He rose. Agios' breath stuck in his chest. The words were so uncomplicated, so sweet and life-giving. He rose. And that's all it takes. Agios later reads the Gospels, but at this point the Christian switch is flipped, and once more, he's a believer. There's an instructive element in Agios' relationship with Nicholas, which didn't exist with his 2 prior sons. Philos was the traditional son, and Krampus had an ethereal quality to him, seeming particularly in touch to the message of Jesus. Nicholas, in many ways, is a father in his own right, studying to be a priest, and being a part of Agios' religious education. The two even call each other father many decades into the future, although Agios is acknowledging Nicholas as a priest when he says it. The 3 sons respectively represent the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the 3 aspects of God. I think this is actually a genuinely clever idea, but aside from maybe Nicholas, it's not executed particularly well. Philos dies in the 1st chapter and gets the son title by default. He's not particularly interesting. Krampus' cognitive issues creating a simpler mind, more open to Christianity, seems a bit crass to both sides of that equation, and while Nicholas in many ways becomes instructive to Agios, the father-son bond here is so brief and tenuous, only lasting 50 or so pages, that it could have used more detail to really come across. Overall, it's a good idea marred by a really poor execution. The secret to Agios' immortality is revealed when he remembers saying, "Let me serve him until his mission is completed," upon witnessing Jesus for the first time. So I guess God took that one literally. Nicholas is the historical Saint Nicholas, with much of his life cobbled together from vague historical details attributed to the figure. When his parents die, Agios becomes his adopted father, and eventually the two start secretly giving up presents. Much like the Jesus part of the story, it becomes a series of story fragments related to the story of Saint Nicholas, only Agios is also there. Eventually, Nicholas grows old and dies at the age of 75. There's one hilarious part where Agios finally decides to tell a dying 75-year-old Nicholas, who he met as a child, that he's immortal. Agios wasn't sure how to begin. "Have you noticed anything different about me? I mean, compared to other men?" His laugh was still a joyful sound, though Nicholas wheezed. "Father, everything is different about you." But the serious look on Agios' face seemed to make him rethink his answer. Gently, he said, "You are set apart, Agios. I don't know how or why, but you are not like other men. You are fast and strong, tireless. You haven't aged a day since I met you when I was just a boy, yet I am now old and about to go home." Agios was surprised. "Why didn't you say anything?" Agios is a man frozen in his 60s when he meets Nicholas, and doesn't age for 65 years. How could anyone not notice this? The book closes with Nicholas dying, and when Agios goes to pick up some of his belongings, he's given a big red coat with white trim. While there, the men holding the coat confuse Agios with Nicholas's uncle, who is also named Nicholas. I guess they forgot the uncle actually died many decades prior. As Agios walks off, He looks up into the horizon, sees a star, and heads in that direction. It's the North Star, so presumably he's headed for the North Pole. Ho, ho, ho. That's not in the book, I just said that. The opening of this book, which makes up about 90% of the plot that's original, really sets up how the novel wants to present faith. Throughout this story, Agios seems to have very little agency of his own, so it isn't surprising that he becomes a spectator through so much of this book. Why try to find your place in the world when you can get swept up in an adventure, or swept up by providence? He never has much of an internal compass, only a vague sense of morality, feeling sympathy for a mentally challenged slave, or wanting to give children carvings. He isn't an immoral man, just one who drifts through life, doing the occasional good deed in his field of vision. Agios' faith seems to be on a hair trigger. It's a question of finding something magical that flips that switch. When Agios is exposed to the teachings of Jesus, he often seems unenthused, dismissing them as unrealistic and outside the realm of possibility of the world he knows. It's strange that the teachings of Christianity in this book aren't presented as particularly convincing or compelling. And it's the magical elements that seem to convince people. And it's particularly those who are hopeless and broken who are most easily convinced. It's a reading of the faith that presents it as something that will be unable to help you in the material world, but will at least alleviate your suffering and hopefully give you a reward in the life thereafter, in accordance with your faith, of course. Funnily enough, it's a very Marxist reading of religion. When Marx called it the opiate of the people, this is precisely what he meant. The book goes even farther in that it seems to present Christianity as best believed without attempting to understand it in any rational way. Agios only becomes a believer when he drinks the living water. He can be charmed by the enthusiasm of Nicholas, and it's the story of the resurrection that really convinces him that Christianity is the right faith for him. The book encapsulates its view of faith, describing it as something that should be done as a child. Here's how Nicholas, the non-Santa one, explains it. It doesn't ask understanding, but only acceptance. What seemed like a story about a father and his relationship with his sons is really more about a man learning how to be a child, at least when it comes to the question of faith. It seems to be a very naked admission, and one you'll hear from religious people all the time. To have faith, one must submit to a higher power that will guide your life for you. Personally, I don't quite align with that message, and in the case of this novel, it makes for a very boring main character. Agios and Nicholas tended to focus on providing aid to the needy when they started their nightly gift-giving exercise, but where Nicholas gave needy families gold they could buy essentials with, Agios would only ever give them toys. I would love to assume this book was trying to fight back against the commercialization of Christmas and to emphasize the need to help out those who are less fortunate, but the two are paired with one another, and when Nicholas dies, the book doesn't really say anything about Agios changing his strategy. Towards the end of the book, we find out Agios' tools, which he had gotten much earlier on, are magical in that they never need to be sharpened, which suggests God is encouraging him to continue carving trinkets for children instead of doing something to improve their lives financially, the way Nicholas had been helping them. Another important way to look at this novel is, and I believe this is what the novel is at its core, a dream crossover fanfic, one where Glenn Beck's pet character Agios is inserted into Glenn Beck's own personal favorite story, or at least one he thinks is extremely important. The big problem here is that one half of this crossover comes from a book the author literally considers sacred. It's not like he can just rewrite the Bible. Well, technically he can, but as a devout Christian, it would be suspect from other members of that community. Instead, we get Agios hanging around the periphery of a book that often feels like a summary of the Gospels and then a summary of the life of St. Nicholas. It's like that one episode of Community where Jack Black reveals he's secretly been a part of the class for the previous episodes, but no one noticed him.
Who cheated?
I did it.
Oh, no.
Rita cheated? Why?
The Gospels unfold all the while, and Agios is there going, whoa. It might have been more understandable had the accuracy of the Gospels convinced Agios that the resurrection he didn't witness must have been true too. But he's largely convinced of that the second he hears the words, he rose. This book isn't about logical proofs for faith, but rather faith in and of itself being worthwhile. This is the least interesting kind of fanfiction. It does nothing to enhance the original story, since Agios is never a meaningful player in it, and Agios is so utterly uninteresting as a character and so devoid of agency that his plotline barely makes a point about the faithful submission of oneself to fate. It tries to connect two characters but can't even give them a scene where they interact. Jesus doesn't even seem to acknowledge he knows who Agios is at any point in this story. It's part of why holy books don't make the best source material for a fanfic to those who hold them sacred. If a text is sacred, it can never be changed or altered. That's so boring for art, because it reduces artists to forever tracing the lines of a story we already know. It's the death of creativity. And I think that's what this book illustrates best. The idea of holding the text as sacred and unchangeable is the antithesis of what makes art interesting. And when we submit our lives to not questioning what we've been told as sacred, we create boring books that retell the same gospel stories we've heard countless times over. We all become Agios on an endless mission to deliver trinkets to children, never considering that this gift of immortality might be used to make the world a better place in some other way than the one God has told us is the right path. And that's why I didn't like this book. Ordinarily, I would include some commentary about the lasting impact of this book, but this is one of the lesser-known novels of Glenn Beck. Based on the number of ratings it has on Goodreads, it's not as popular as The Christmas Sweater, Agenda 21, or The Overton Window. Based on the trailer and comments from Glenn Beck himself, he was hoping to turn this novel into a movie, and that clearly did not happen. I couldn't find sales figures for this book, but having only been released as a small hardcover, I suspect they weren't very impressive. This was a shorter book review than usual because there isn't a whole lot to say. I'm kind of experimenting with my form here, fusing summary and analysis together. Let me know if you like it that way, if you'd rather have just a plain summary and then analysis, like clearly separated, or more mixing, I don't know. This book kind of sucked and was boring, and I wish I had chosen something better, but the madness of the idea seduced me. I ignored all the reviews saying this was a boring book, and yeah, right into it. Also, I'm talking a little longer here in the credits because you might notice I have a new song in the background that my lovely friend Dana recorded. Also, I'm announcing that I'm doing YouTube memberships now. If you are currently a patron, don't bother becoming a member because it is the exact same thing. You can express your thanks for me on the lowest tier of the membership, but if you go up to the $4.99 tier, which is the exact same price as Patreon, minus 1 cent because YouTube won't let me put $5, you will get your name in the credits like these lovely people, early access to videos, and a download to Dana's classic theme for me and this new one, which is pretty cool. I even include a short version of the original theme, because why not? That money helps me create more videos like this one, or my sitcom retrospectives, or like my response videos, and I appreciate it very much. If you'd like to support this channel in a way that doesn't cost you any money though, that's always available because you can like, comment, and subscribe, or hit the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching.